We're going to be in 1 Corinthians 13 today as we're going to continue this series. Language is a funny thing. I enjoy dealing with it on a regular basis. I enjoy the fact that it's kind of what I do, but it's funny. It's strange because it's complex. Whenever you think about the concept of language, think about the word stop. Immediately, whenever I say stop, something comes to the mind of nearly every thinking person in this room. If you're the mom of preschoolers, it's the word you will repeat 1,000 times today. Stop. Stop, put it down, stop doing that. If you're the parent of teenagers, it's very possible the first thing that comes to your mind is stop talking. Because they're talking back to you, they're trying to defend something, they're trying to argue with you. Just stop in some way. Those that might have a little bit heavier of a foot, you might think of a stop sign. There, all these different things come to mind. If you grew up, if you're about my age, you think of one thing that I think of. Whenever I hear stop, all I can think of is collaborate and listen. Ice is back with a brand new invention, something. Grab a hold of me tightly, flow like a harpoon daily and not. Is that not you? No, that's not you? Okay. Well, that's what I think of in that moment. But one word brings to mind all these different things. You think about the word alone. What comes to mind whenever you think about the word alone? For some of you in this room, it sounds like heaven. Alone. Alone is what you will one day be again in the bathroom when your kids grow up. Alone. Alone sounds like a vacation. It's something you can't even begin to fathom. To be alone again is all you want. For others in this room, that word is their living hell. Because they are alone. And one of the reasons that they love Sunday morning, one of the reasons they love this moment is because the aloneness of their week is finally broken in the midst of a big crowd and all the fun that comes with it. It's the same word, but two radically different emotions. What comes to mind when I say the word love? All these different things. Now, all these different things, these deep wounds that we have because maybe we weren't loved or we thought we were in love and we felt rejected in the midst of love. All these positive things that are there because we can remember what love was all about. But maybe even in the midst of the positive comes the sorrow because that person did love us in a way that nobody else could, but now they're gone. Or that person loved us in a way that nobody else could, but now they stopped. All these emotions come in at play, and already humanity is suffering because sin has influenced us and affect us, so we don't know what the true definition of love is, but even with the definition that we're working from, it means so many different things. Think about how you'll use the word just today. Just today. Oh, I love sleeping in. I love a rainy day. I love a bagel. I love a good game. I love a short sermon. Now we're dealing in the hypothetical. I love getting off work. I love going to the golf course. I love playing with my friends. But by the way, honey, I love you. By the way, little kids, I love you. And I love popcorn. We use the same word to connote all these different emotions that it confuses things. Thankfully, the ancient Greek where the New Testament was written, it has some more clarity than what the English language has. In biblical Greek, the word for that we translate love over many different places is actually 4 different words in Greek. So they could actually communicate differences, nuances of what love was all about. They have the storge love, this kind of love that children have for their parents, this kind of needy love that is there, but it's good. It's a good love. It's a powerful love. It's as strong as any love you can possibly imagine, so much so that my guess is if you have small children, you love the fact that they need you. You love the fact that they love you. And you can think back to your parents if they're no longer here. And, oh, how desperately you long just to feel the embrace of your mom one more time or just see the hands of your dad one more time. That family kind of love that is there. They have this concept of this brotherly love, this phileo love, from which we get the word Philadelphia, this idea idea of this deep affection that you can have between people. We were leaving home group the other night, and I told Jenny that I'm sure our home group gets a lot of stuff wrong, but there's a deep affection in the room that you can just feel it. It's this phileo kind of love. It's this identity that now where we desperately want, desire the success of everybody in the room. We all have our different struggles and where we go and what we do, but there's this core value that is there where we love one another. And the Greeks have this word eros, from which we get the word erotic, this sexual love that's there that explains a love between a husband and a wife. C.S. Lewis would say that these three loves are the lower loves. They're loves that are available to all of us here on earth, that believer and unbeliever alike can experience these things. But they are, to use the illustration we used last week, but a shadow of God's love, a shadow of the real thing. Paul will say in 1 Corinthians 13, we see now through a glass darkly. So we can just see the movements. We can make out the shape, the object of love. But we don't know the true substance with a clarity that's there. And C.S. Lewis says that these brotherly loves, this family love, this sexual love, that these loves are but a shadow of God's love, the Greek word agape. It's a love that is now projected downward. Whereas in these other relationships, there's enough brokenness to where the love can be equal, to where I love my children and my children love me back, and we both kind of almost have this need for one another. And in brotherly affection that's there, there's this equality that's there. And clearly with eros, there's this equality between spouses. But whenever it comes to God's love for us, we are not an equal object as He is. He has given His love to us in a way that we can't fully respond to it. Even if we love Him in return, our love doesn't fulfill Him, doesn't bring a bunch to the table. He brings everything to the table. It's completely undeserved in every way. And yet it's totally perfect. What Paul says, I think, in part, is that we all have these experiences with love. But if we're not very careful, what you and I can do is, because we know what it's like to love our wives or our husbands, because we know what it's like to love our children, because we do have this deep affection for other people, if we're not very careful, we can confuse those tastes of love, those experiences of love, for the full substance of everything that love is. And what Paul says is we don't know what everything that love is, because that is wrapped in the very character and the nature of God. And so 1 Corinthians 13, in part, is God now revealing what love is to us. And the word that is used over and over throughout the chapter is not about a love for a child or this phileo, this brotherly love, or even this erotic love. It is agape. The old King James so much so wanted to make this clear that they wouldn't translate 1 Corinthians 13 by saying love is. They said charity is. To communicate, this is God's love, the perfect love. This is the love that you and I hopefully are aspiring to. This is a love that one day we will have whenever we see God face to face and our hearts are fully transformed. We will love in this way. But until then our love will be lacking. And a text like this, a sermon like this, will give us something to aspire to see what our future is going to hold, to at times live up to, because the Spirit is indwelling in our hearts if you're a believer of Jesus Christ. But in other times, it's just going to be a slap in the face and a reminder of how much we fail and how much our love lacks in comparison to the great love of God. So let's read about that agape love in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Let's start reading in verse number 1. I think it will be good to go back over the verses we read last week. You'll hear them differently, I hope, because of what we learned last week. And let's just read down through verse 8. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all that I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. It does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. You know, whenever we look at a text on a Sunday morning, we do so in different ways. Sometimes we cover different passages. Generally speaking, we cover a chunk of a passage, kind of like what we did last week. And so as we go through it, there's a clear argument, especially whenever you're in one of the letters here that Paul is writing. There's a clear argument that's being made. And so we basically just run through the argument as he runs through it. Sometimes we rearrange it to maybe fit our setting a little bit more, but he lays the argument out and we follow that argument. But today, whenever we look at a passage like this, a scripture like this, it's almost like looking at a proverb or maybe even one of the Psalms or a story where what we're going to do is we're just going to take these first words, love is patient, and we're going to look at them, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to take that one verse, love is patient, we're going to set it here in the center, and then we're just going to kind of walk around it. And to look at it from different angles, to see it from different vantage points, and that in so doing, by taking a walk around it, it's going to give us an understanding of the whole. The complexity of the whole, we're going to pick apart by kind of going point by point, maybe not stringed together in a logical argument as much as, hey, I see it this angle this way, and I see it from this angle this way. I said last week that whenever I have maybe a couple in the office and I'm listening to what's going on within their lives, and I can almost always diagnose what's going on as a love problem. It always is, and rarely do they see it that way whenever they enter in, and I understand why, because they often feel love for one another, but they have fallen for this trap of believing that love is a feeling instead of an actual action. It's one of the interesting things of 1 Corinthians 13 is he gives 15 words here, phrases to describe or to fill in the blank, love is blank. There's 15 things that are here. Patient is the first one of those. And all of these words end up not being adjectives. They're not descriptive words of adjectives. Instead, they are verbs. It's this action concept. So that Bob Goff writes the book Love Does. And here's what it does. Here's the actual activity that it takes. And so whenever I'm working with a couple there in the office and just trying to assist them to see where their problems are, to get them on then to the expert that they need, almost without fail, I will say, the problem here is you're not loving one another. And sometimes they kick back. Now, sometimes they admit it. Yeah, you're right, we're not loving one another. Sometimes they kick back. And they say, oh, no, we feel love for one another. And I say, well, I get that. But you're failing to love one another. You know, the great country theologian said, yes, I admit I've got a thinking problem. I think of it from a concept of, yes, I admit I've got a loving problem, that I fail to love. We said last week in the sermon, we got to say it again. That's what we're trying to illustrate here, that you and I do not know how to love. We don't know how to do it. We're trying to figure it out. We're trying to understand it. And God has created us in part to desire love. I think sin has left a void now till we want that filled. And we know that love is the only thing that can actually fill it. But the problem is we don't know how to go about it. And so God is teaching us now how to actually go about it. What love is actually like now. And so these are the actions and activities. So as I'm working with a couple, I will say, well, you're just not loving each other very well. And they will fight back. And I will say, okay, let me do this. I want to read off for you 15 descriptions of love. And whenever I reach one that you're failing to do on occasion, I want you to stop me. And I will say, are you ready? Love is patient. I don't read any further. I don't have to. I'm yet to have a single couple go, oh, we got that one. If you got that one, you probably wouldn't be in my office. Or if you got that one, you would probably be selling millions of books because nobody else has got that one. Love is patient. If I ask you today, do you love your children? You would clearly say yes. If I would ask you, illustrate tangible ways that you show love to your child, how long would it take before you would write down, I clearly love my child because of how patient I am with them? Husbands, how quickly would you list that off? If I asked, do you love your wives? And you would say, yes. Your wife, not your wives. That's a whole different story. If I say, do you love your wife? You would say, yes. I would say, well, list off some examples of how you love your wife. How long would it take you before you would write down how patient I am with her? You know why I love this list? Paul makes the case in the first 3 verses, you don't know what love is. And I buy into it. I say, okay, I don't. You know what, Paul? I don't. And I can cognitively agree with it. I can believe in it. But there's still a part of me that doubts because I experience love. I feel love. The love I have for my children, for my wife, the love I have for you, the love I experience, the love I receive in return. There's still part of me that thinks, no, I think I do know what love is. And Paul says, okay, you want to know what love is? Love is patient. And I go, oh, got me. Got me. Because I'm not. And this is such a foreign concept to me that I don't even see often the relationship between love and patience. Isn't that interesting? That what Paul and the power of the Holy Spirit list first would be one of the things that we would see last. Now, I'm not saying this is the most important thing to God. Whenever it comes to God, actually, I think it's all equally important. It's just the character of who He is. We are the ones that come up with these hierarchies of what's the most important thing. Tell me, and I'll try to do that first until somebody says patience, and then we say, well, let's go with number 2 and see how that's going to work for us. But I think what Paul is doing here is within the life of the church. And remember, that's the first meaning of this, is the life of the church. He's looking at the church at Corinth, and he's saying, you know what your problem is you don't love each other. And they're shouting back, yes, we do love each other. And they said, no, you don't, because you're not being patient. And they're like, is that true? Remember, just a few chapters ago, which means like 8 months ago, right? Just a few chapters ago, we studied that what was going on with communion at the church at Corinth is that some who either were so wealthy they didn't have jobs, or they had a typical 8 to 5 job and they were making good money, they would get off from work and they would come to the church to worship. But some of the other day laborers who didn't control their own schedules, who had to finish the day until the day was done or until the boss said you can go, they would always be late. And the rich were getting so impatient with the poor that they were going ahead and doing communion by themselves and leaving out the poorest among them and saying, you can have the leftovers whenever you get here. And in that culture, you did communion and then you go have a meal, which then put them in the front of the line of the buffet. The people that didn't even need to eat were now getting the very best food. And those that were hungry from a full day's labor would get there late, would take communion by themselves, would then go to the buffet line where there wasn't very much food at all. And even if there was, it wasn't the best of food. And the ones that were hungering the most now didn't have any food to eat because the rich were losing patience. And Paul is saying, you're not loving one another because you can't even wait for communion for the people that are working out there. That's a love problem. It's a love problem. And what we need to do is have our eyes open to the truth that the issue within our lives is not some minor issue that we can excuse aside. It's not some practical problem that, well, we just need a new strategy to figure it out. We need to open our eyes to the condition and the nature of our heart. Is your issue is you don't love your wife. Your issue is you don't love your husband. Your issue is you don't love your children. The issue is you don't love somebody in this room. And you don't take the time to get to know them to where you even have to struggle to know them, so at least you feel better about yourself. This is an issue. It's a love issue, and it's an issue that's right up here in this church. We don't know how to love each other, and we're failing to do so. And the tragedy for us is our failure to love in the society that we now live in not only has a ripple effect in this room, now because we live in this social media nature, we actually begin to brag online about our inability to love. Yes, I believe we got a loving problem. And Paul's trying to help us figure it out. And he says, do you know what love does? Love is patient. Well, what does that even mean? Patient. And there's several texts throughout the New Testament where Paul will call on the church to be patient. He tells, I think it may be the church at Thessalonica, where he says you need to rebuke those who are idle. So those that aren't working, those that are just trying to feed off the church, those who could have a job who don't, you need to rebuke them, but you need to have patience with them in their weakness and their idleness. So what's happening here in that church, it's Thessalonica, it's somewhere. Trust me, look it up. What's happening in that church is they are rightly confronting these people on the issue. And Paul encourages that. And so clearly love, the patience of love is not this apathy. It's not this passivity. It's not this concept of, well, I just throw my hands up and don't do anything. They're acting in a right and loving way, and that they're confronting people with truth, as difficult as that actually is. But what Paul says is, in the midst of telling them that they need to get a job, in the midst of telling them and explaining to them why they can't now have just free food from the church because they're able-bodied people and they shouldn't be dependent upon the church, as compared to some of these other people the widows here, who rightfully should deserve what the group has. As you're confronting them in truth, taking that action, he says, be patient with them, the idle and the weak. And what it seems like to me, what's being said in that moment, is the way that you could be impatient, the way that you could lose your patience with them, is if you begin to lose heart for them. That's one way we can interpret this passage. Love does not lose heart for people. Anytime you lose heart towards somebody, you're being impatient. What that means here is you're stepping out of the bounds of your role, your God-given right. Think back to the word patience or patient. If you were to look that up in Webster's dictionary, chances are the first definition you would see is someone suffering from an illness. Not in this context of what we're talking about, but they would take it into a medical term. And a hospital has patients. A doctor has a patient. And it begins to reveal to us this interconnectedness between the word patient and suffering. If you take the word patient all the way back, specifically in the Latin, it means to suffer. Which, if you take it back into the Greek, that's why the old King James Version translates this passage. I think it says, charity suffereth long. There's this connection here between patience and suffering. And so, if we take that concept of a patient as one who is ill, it begins to distinguish in the healing process, there's a difference between the patient and the doctor. And they play different roles. The patient has the suffering. It's their job to communicate it as best they possibly can. They have aspects that they should play, but they should never step in and start playing the role of doctor, because that's a different understanding. It's a different set of responsibilities. We got to be careful about blurring these lines. This is the reason that doctors shouldn't with big stuff, shouldn't be treating their own family members, because they'll lose their sense of objectivity. As you begin to blur the line between doctor and patient, it's a scary line. Many doctors struggle with this sometimes, especially it can lead to addiction. They begin to kind of treat themselves, and they lose that understanding of objectivity, and it can lead them down a very dangerous road that they got to be careful about. And so the idea of a patient I have an illness, but I have a specific role that I'm supposed to play now in my healing. There's a doctor who does something different than me. Family does something differently. I now have a role to play. Whenever you and I are being impatient, we are stepping outside of our role, stepping outside of what we're supposed to do. And so if it is the church at Thessalonica, I should have looked it up beforehand. If it is the church at Thessalonica, that Paul is now saying, whenever you confront them, the weak and the idle, don't lose patience with them. What he's saying is, as a loving church member, you're playing the right role in speaking truth into their lives. That's our responsibility in the midst of relationship, to speak truth and love. But if you are impatient with them, if you lose heart for them, what you're probably going to be doing is trying to inflict more pain upon them, or beginning to justify that, you know what, they're worse than what you are. I'm better than them. And what you're doing in that moment is stepping outside of, I am a sinner saved by grace, created in the image of God, so I have value, and yet a sinner, and so I'm still a sinner. And you begin to disengage to where you think their sin is worse than your own. That's what's going on in Corinth. What's going on in Corinth is the church has lost heart for one another. And so the rich don't care if the poor aren't eating. And so the sexually immoral don't care if the church is suffering while they enjoy their sin. And they begin to write the story of, you know what, my sin isn't as big as their sin. My heart is better than their heart. And in that moment, they are stepping outside of their role in the truth and beginning to play the role of God. And so as God, I'm going to judge that some human beings are better than others. I'm going to change my own character, my own nature. In patience, Impatience is stepping outside of your God-given boundaries. And generally speaking, what it means is, I want my way. I want you to do it the way I want you to do it. Which now puts us as the sovereign over the other person. Which is now us going out of bounds. The text says that love is patient. It means that we will play our role. Now notice we have a role to play. Notice patience is this activity. It's this engagement. One of the recurring themes of the New Testament, Paul says, is that we are to patiently wait for God. That we are to patiently endure our suffering. That we're to patiently interact and be patient with evil. There's a role to be played within that. It's not just I throw my hands up in the air like I just don't care, right? It's now I'm actually doing something. To wait on God with patience means I'm seeking Him, I'm longing for Him, I'm looking for Him in every way, but I'm not losing heart believing that He's not going to show up. It means right in the middle of the illness, when everything seems bleak, when everything turns dark, I'm not in the middle of that going to lose heart in believing that God no longer cares for me. I'm going to think that He does care for me even in the midst of my suffering. I'm going to believe that He is present with me even though whenever I can't see Him. It means in the midst of it, I can endure because I now have faith in Him. I think so much of patience is simply believing that God is going to do what He said He's going to do. You see, here we are and God invades our lives and our eyes are open because of His grace in faith, and we now see who He is and what He's doing and what He's done on our behalf. We understand what our story now actually is, how our eternity is secure, but even before we get to eternity, how He is present with us in the midst of this life, transforming our hearts. So that no matter what situation comes our way, we still believe that God is in control of this and He's using this now for the transformation of our own hearts. To lose heart in that. I'm not saying you can't have a bad day. I'm not saying you can't ask the question why. I'm just saying if you get to a point that you just completely give up on God in every way, it's to lose heart for God. And in that moment, you've just grown impatient. You know the great hope of a Christian, the great hope that we can hold on to. And this is something that we have that nobody else has. Because we believe that God is sovereign in all things and He controls all things. Because we believe that He has written a story that He's going to bring to an ultimate conclusion that is ultimately for our good and for His good as well. Because we believe that everything happens not just for a reason, but for 1,000 different reasons. And that God can orchestrate all these things to build a tapestry that He wants to do to now have this mosaic that reflects Him. We have the hope to know that God never wastes our suffering. There's never a hurt or a pain or a sorrow or a heartache that God can't use and redeem for our good, for our glory, for His good, for His glory, for the well-being of everybody else. I hear it all the time, I can't take any more pain. And my thought is always this, you can take more pain if you know that that pain is for good. In the same way that I would never consciously injure my child, but I can strut them right into the doctor's office and hold them down no matter how loud they're screaming and allow a stranger to jab a sharp needle in their thigh and push it in. And I can do all of that in good nature and good fun and good understanding that is for their good. Why? Because I know the pain will matter. I know it will account for something. When you and I lose heart, when you and I lose the heart of God, whenever we get impatient, we lose sight of the fact that God is redeeming our pain. That God is using our pain. That God can get glory from the midst of our pain. This is why I struggle. And this is why I struggle with this idea of assisted suicide. I know it's a tough situation, it's a tough conversation. I would never speak into an individual situation unless I was invited into it. But on a broad scale, Christianity teaches that God actually uses suffering for the transformation of our hearts and for everybody involved. And for us to begin to say, well, I don't want to live in an undignified way, begins to, in my opinion, cause us to be impatient. And we're not willing to now choose the loving action of patience in the moment of trust of God, of caring for one another. I wonder how much of a society that wants to expedite death has far more to do with the healthy's unwillingness to be caretakers of the sick than it is the sick's willingness to actually have caretakers. The fact of the matter is, we are so distancing ourselves from suffering that before long, to even have to suffer might become a shame in this society that you were then expected to take care of all by yourself. That's called an impatient society. A society that's now lost heart for other people. God says that love is patient. You know what I love about this? It is so radically different than anything I would ever expect love to be. And yet I think there are times in which God tells us truth and it so confronts what's in our heart that it doesn't feel right at all. And in faith, I have to trust Him. Forgiveness feels that way. It just doesn't feel right at all. And so I just have to trust Him for that. But there are other times in which God says, hey, here's what it really is. That just deep down within my soul, it feels right. Love is patient, feels right. It just speaks to something. It's an old illustration, but do you remember years ago when Tom Cruise was jumping up and down on Oprah's couch? You remember that? Because he had fallen in love with that girl from Dawson's Creek. What's her name? What was Tom Cruise's third wife name? Oh, Katie Holmes. Yeah. So he'd fallen in love with He'd fallen in love with Katie, and so he got divorced. Who was his second wife? Nicole Kidman. Yeah. Okay. So he'd fallen. Now, who was his first wife? Mimi. Yeah, Mimi. What are the first three commandments? Oh yeah. Now, yeah, y'all don't know that. I can list Tom Cruise's wives off. We have a Bible 101 class in 2 weeks, February 18th. What's the second beatitude? I don't know. Who's Tom Cruise's third girlfriend? It was Katie Holmes. Oh, okay, thanks. So he's jumping up and down on the couch for Katie Holmes. I've told this story before, but y'all weren't here. So he's jumping up and down on the couch for Katie Holmes, and I'll never forget, at the end of that week, I was playing golf with my buddies. We're playing golf, and we're over at Fiana where the houses kind of weave in and out of the golf course. And so I'm standing on the tee box on 13, and I look over to the side, and because the guys I played with, out of bounds was to the left, and I saw these people that were in great danger because of the friends I play with. They tend to hit it in that way. And so I stopped them and said, hey, let's let this couple get out of our way. And what it was this elderly man pushing this elderly woman in this wheelchair, just out for a Friday morning walk. And we had to be patient because it was taking a good deal of time for them to get out of the way. And as I looked at that, I was so struck because every headline was reading, Tom Cruise is in love. And I'm sure he felt it. I'm sure he believed it, and the Church of Scientology allowed that one. And so I'm sure that's what happened to Nicole Kidman. And so I'm sure he felt it. You know what this text says? Love is long. It's long. You know what is short? Lust. You don't necessarily jump up and down on a couch for love. But you do for lust. Because you want what you don't necessarily deserve. But love might jump up and down on the couch. I told the guys, I said, y'all want to know what love is? Look at that. I know I'm writing a story into it, but we're writing a story into everything. But what I read was this old man whose wife was now too feeble to walk, and he wanted to get her out for the morning. And so they were just out taking a stroll. And the same man who, whenever he first fell in love, he would have jumped on the couch. Probably told all his friends. Probably one of the greatest thrills in life was the first time she held his hand. How many beaches had they walked together? How many mountains had they climbed? I wonder how many times those hands have been clasped in prayer, in heartache. Oh, the excitement of whenever they got pregnant, I can't help but think that they embraced in some way. Who knows if that hand held the other as mama died. The chaos of the first time the kid was out late in their own car, those hands were together. And now here they are in a state of life where they can't even walk and hold hands at the same time because his hands have to be on a wheelchair. And yet it's love. And is there anybody in this room that doubts it? No. We know it. We know it. We know deep down that love is patient. It doesn't mean it's passive. It doesn't mean it's apathetic. It doesn't even mean that you're going to live with him for the rest of his life. If he won't stop that addiction, if he won't learn, if he won't figure it out. But it does mean that you're not going to seek revenge. It does mean you're going to act in the most loving way toward him, even if he doesn't think it's love, even if your in-laws don't think it's love, even if everybody else doesn't think that it's love. Whenever you kick him out, when your heart breaks, and that's what it's going to require in this moment. That's the most loving thing toward this person. They've chosen this thing over you, and they won't stop it, and they're still involved in it. And in this moment, you don't know what to do. And in love, you pray, and you try your very best. And it seems as though what you need to do here is the hard thing, and yet it is the patient thing. It is the loving thing. Giving them a chance. Love suffers long. But that doesn't mean we enable. It doesn't mean, this text clearly doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that you have to let him beat you up, emotionally or physically. It doesn't mean that you have to give your kid money. It means that you have a role to play and you figure it out and you're going to play it for as long as you possibly can, and you're going to keep on playing with the power of the Holy Spirit, and you're going to play your role. You're not going to step up and try to play the role of God, to manipulate, to do something else. You're not going to change some other role, but you're going to do the best you can in the situation that you're in love and compassion. You're not going to seek revenge. You're going to love them while allowing them to play their role as well and trusting God in the midst of it all. This text says that love is patient. And it slaps me in the face as another reminder that I don't know what love is, because I'm not patient. And this text is not calling me and you to now muster it up, to try better. Because you know what's going to happen? You know what's going to happen if you try to be more patient? You're going to grow impatient with yourself, because you can't do it. You can't do it. But you know what we can do? We can learn about it. We can appreciate it about God. We can understand His Spirit rest within us. And the moment we start being tempted to be impatient, we can be reminded of the truth. And sometimes, because God's Spirit's within us, He's transforming our hearts. Sometimes we'll be patient in a way that otherwise we wouldn't have been. Whereas other times we will fail. And yet even as we fail, do you know what will happen if you are a believer? You'll be reminded, oh wow, even in my failure, God is still patient with me. God is long-suffering with me. God is compassionate toward me. This text, I don't know why it brings up the story, but it does. My sister's not here, so I'll tell it. When I was young, my sister would bring over boyfriends to the house, and it was a cool thing because I was 4 years younger than her, and she had a penchant for older men, and so they were even older than her. And so I'm 4 years younger, and so these guys that were 6 or 7 years older would come over. And it's cool. It's a 12-year-old little boy, and if my parents weren't home, I was 10. But you'll do the math on that later. These boys would come over, and the smart ones would know that I was kind of an in, right? You got to impress the family, so you get connection with the little brother, and that will show that you're a potential good person. And so the smart ones would always try to draw close to me. Well, one day, one of them came over that wasn't so bright. And so my friends and I were out playing in the front yard, playing football, and he came out and said, hey, can I play? Well, yeah, you can play. It's the coolest thing ever. We're a bunch of, 10-year-old boys or whatever, and now this 16-year-old wants to come out here and play. Man, you're all-time quarterback. We can't throw the ball. You can. You're in. He said, all right, let me loosen my arm up a little bit. He said, let me show you how far I can throw the ball. Great. He said, Kevin, go long. Oh, there's nothing better than that. There's nothing better as a little kid. You'll see it all the time. To be able to play catch now with somebody older is so cool. And so I started running, and I ran past my mailbox and started going down the road, and I'm turning, looking at the ball, and he goes, oh, I can throw it much further than that. I'm like, oh, of course you can. You're 16. I'm 10. So I went down the hill into Dr. Cheshire's yard, past the first tree and past the second tree. We're now into the end zone. I'm looking for the ball. Keep on going. Well, nothing exists past this point for us. There's a big wall that we kind of call the Great Wall of China that led into the Goins' yard, and nobody ever went to the Goins yard. We'd never been there before. Keep on going. And so I keep on running. And I go past the wall into this abyss that is now this nowhere land. And I turn and look for the ball. He says, keep on going. Well, this time I had grown wise. I'm like, you can't throw it this far. And he yells out, you're right. Throws the ball down and walks inside. Now, I know he's a jerk, right? I don't know if he still is, probably. But I mean, who knows? I don't. Maybe he's come to Jesus. That'd be great. Let's pray for him. I think I've lost heart for him. This is the problem with pastoring your hometown. Next week, somebody's going to come up and go, I know who that is. Well, good. You pray for him. Okay. It broke me. I mean, think about this. I mean, it's a petty little story that I'm telling 27 years later. Celebrate Recovery, Thursdays, 6 o'clock. It was embarrassing. It's heartbreaking. We thought we had this connection, and then it was gone. Do you know why I love Jesus? You can never outrun his arm. You see, in that moment, I was being played the role of the fool, and he was telling me to go on just to see how far I'd run. God never does that to us. We play the role of the fool on our own, and we see how far we can run from God. And we think to ourselves that we can get to a point to where his eyes won't see us, to where his sovereign control isn't over our lives. We think we can get to a point to where we'll no longer hear his voice or feel that guilt and conviction. We think we can get to a point that we'll be happy without him. I have some bad news for you today. You can never outrun the arm of God. And you think you're getting away with it and nobody else knows, but he knows. And a day is going to come in which he will hold you accountable. I don't care if you don't feel any guilt whatsoever. I don't care if you feel completely content with your life. A day is going to come in which everybody's going to know and you're going to know because God knows. I have some very good news for you today. You can never outrun the arm of God. No matter how far you've gone from him. No matter what you try to do. No matter how irreconcilable you feel like your differences are with God. No matter how shame-filled you are right now, or if everybody knew how shame-filled you would be. If you turn today, even though you can't even see him on the horizon because you feel so far away, his arm can still reach you wherever you are. Because love is patient. And what you have confused as passivity, or apathy, or non-existence from God, has actually simply been his patience with you waiting. Waiting for you to finally come to the end of yourself, to turn around and to simply say, God, help me. Because if you will say that, that hand will take hold of you. And no matter what your hand does, no matter how many times you let go of it, it will never let go of you. You can't outrun the arm of God because God himself is patient. That's what love really is. And that's what I want it to be for me.